joining us. My name is Tracy Cook, and this podcast series, Victim to Victory, gives a voice to those that have overcome challenges in all forms that dare greatly to share their real stories. Amazing humans that have seen hope and risen above those adversities that go on to support and inspire others to do the same. And today we are giving a voice to Allison Smiley, and I want to share a bit of information before we get her to share her story and her journey and the launch of her new book, which is absolutely fantastic. And her book is 8 Steps to Healing the Past and Finding Peace Within, and it's called Overcoming Trauma. I'm really excited to hear what this is all about and Allison's story. So welcome, Allison, to the Victim to Victory podcast series.
Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be here.
Fantastic. So who is Allison? Where does your journey start? And how does it lead us to the launch of this fabulous book?
Woo, that's a loaded question. It's just been a long journey for me, quite honestly. I started reading self-help books when I was 12 years old, just trying to figure out what the heck was wrong with me. I feel like I had been dropped off like by a spaceship, and just kind of dropped off and left with no instruction manual or anything, just kind of always felt like an outsider, didn't really know how to live life or interact in the world. And, just kind of went on this really long journey of self-discovery and, obviously went through a lot of hardship and trials and, I just kept going, just trying to figure out, obviously went through, some difficult, traumas and experiences, that really left me, quite honestly, I attempted suicide a couple of times. I've been hospitalized, a number of times, just trying to get through some tough times. And, I just kept going. I just really I felt hopeless, but I just kept believing that there was something out there for me, that there was an answer. And so I ended up getting certified in a bunch of different holistic and spiritual practices and techniques, which really helped me out. And then I opened my own practice as a holistic and spiritual practitioner. So I started seeing clients and helping them on their, journey to healing and wellness. And then as I was doing that, this was about 10 years ago. And as I was doing that, I noticed that my clients were coming to me with kind of heavier trauma issues. And I felt a little bit inadequate and being able to help them. So I ended up going back and getting a master's degree in psychology with a specialization in trauma and crisis response. And then I was able to really combine, my education and experience in the, psychology with my holistic and spiritual practices, and really kind of came up with, and of course there was my own healing journey, during this time as I was working through my own stuff, and then, helping clients overcome their issues as well. So that's kind of how the book came about, so the book is really, my journey as well as the 8 steps. I came up with the 8 steps through I figured out I didn't have anybody showing me the way, so I was a lot of trial and error, which, was also trial by fire, right? So some things worked and some things didn't. And some things exacerbated my symptoms and made things worse sometimes. So what I really did was just kind of figure out what worked and what was effective for my, my symptoms and my, trauma issues and things. And I just started, using those with my clients and found that they worked for them as well. And so over the years, I've been teaching a lot of these concepts, for the past 10 or 12 years, that are incorporated in the 8-step program that's in my book. But the little pieces started falling into place, these last few years. And that's kind of how I came up with my program.
That's fantastic. So this is I mean, all wrapped up in this little ball, and it's kind of unraveling layer by layer. So your healing, I'm hearing, is part of coaching with your clients as well, part of having those experiences and still going through and overcoming a lot of those traumas and getting those responses and actually using your 8 steps to heal from them or start the healing process.
Absolutely. Yes. So, when I first started on my spiritual journey, it's probably like in the mid 2000s, and really just kind of trying to deal with my own issues. I had health issues. Some of the trauma issues that I dealt with were a lot of the autoimmune stuff from just being so like in hypervigilance and from, just being on like that high alert, and my body just kind of started breaking down just from that high stress state of, so just a trauma, fight or flight, just being in that flight state for so long, my body couldn't handle it. So yeah, it was really just a learning process, and I had my clients that I was, seeing for a while. And, I talk about this in my book, but I really, back then I was really in what I like to call spiritual bypassing. I was really focused on love and light and, all the positive stuff and, which is good. It's great, but truly like underneath, I hadn't really dealt or processed all of that stuff that was laying kind of dormant underneath, and so as I was working with some of these clients with these heavier trauma issues, it did trigger some of my own stuff, and it prompted me. And when I say prompted, I mean, it was more like a 2x4, than it was upside my head, but like, how it happens. Spirit just kind of, shoves you into that experience where, kicking and screaming, you're going to heal that, but yeah. So really, I kind of, when I talk about it with my clients and students, it's kind of like I was, love and light was like all these flowers that I was sprinkling on top of a big pile of poo, it was like you saw this, it was like fragrant and smelled nice, but it still was like covering this big pile of poo that I hadn't dealt with, and so I really just needed to walk through that and just overcome, that stuff that I'd really been avoiding. And so that was kind of my journey really for the past, 5 to 7 years, was just to really feel it, walk through it, heal it, and get to the other side, which I really never thought was like an option. I thought it was just really about managing symptoms, okay, well, I'm depressed or I've got anxiety, and we'll just, we're going to white knuckle it through it today, and I just did that for years and years. And so really being on the other side of it, I was like, holy cow, this is a miracle, and I really need to share this, with the world. And so that's
100%. And there are just so many different forms of trauma as well. And I think a lot of people, and that's a great analogy, putting the flowers on top of the poop, because I think it may be a little bit of a generational thing as well, but because we talk more openly about feelings and all of that in recent years. But I think putting the flowers on top of the poop, a lot of people are just walking through life either in denial of going through their trauma or not addressing those, or just seeing 1 or 2 symptoms. Would you mind sharing with your expertise in psychology and dealing with trauma clients, what kind of are some of the side effects that you see from trauma?
Oh gosh, yes, absolutely. So, and trauma is usually defined in a couple of categories, right? So you've got like a single trauma where somebody's experienced like a single event, maybe an attack or, like a mugging or, whatever, some type of like a natural disaster, something like that. And then you've got your chronic trauma, right? Like the type of trauma that's repeated over and over. So that could be like childhood abuse, domestic abuse, prisoners of war, things where you just kind of feel like you can't escape from it, and so, they both take a toll for sure on the psyche, and there is a quiz that people can take. It's called ACEs, which is Adverse Childhood Experiences. And they've done a lot of research on it on the past couple of decades, but they've really tied into how these ACEs affect our physical and mental and spiritual health. So they're like, they've really figured out like, okay, if you've had X number of ACEs, you're really more likely to experience diabetes, obesity, heart problems. They've really tied it into health issues. And then, of course, we all know that it takes a toll, PTSD, right? So it takes a toll on mental health as well, anxiety, depression, avoiding social interactions, hypervigilance, which is that big startle, like people tend to startle more easily. And then, people deal with that, right? So we have these symptoms that arise. So we're naturally going to want to soothe ourselves. So typically we want, we're going to maybe fall into self-sabotage or addictive behaviors like, excessive drinking, excessive eating, drug taking, whether that's prescription or other, because nobody likes to feel anxious, or depressed all the time. So our natural, our innate instincts are to, our drive is to get back to homeostasis and to soothe that, right? So we're either always going toward pleasure or avoiding pain. So, a lot of times addiction or addictive behaviors will kind of coincide with some of those symptoms as well. So you've kind of got a couple of battles to deal with. Yeah.
And I'm guessing this, it's not an easy plan. It's a lifelong plan, especially if you've gone through multiple traumas. You could be healing for the rest of your life, but as long as you're taking step forwards, because again, once we kind of start unraveling, we find deeper stuff, don't we?
Yes. Oh my gosh. I in my book, I describe it. It's like playing whack-a-mole. I don't know if you guys have that in Australia, but you're like, it's like that amusement park game and a little mole pops up and you try to hit it and then you get it and then another one pops up, and that's how I felt like I was dealing with my symptoms. I was like, okay, depression, whack, and then up pops like, overeating or shopping or anxiety, and I'm like whack whack whack, I can't keep up with it. It's like too many all at once, and so I feel like this program really it's not focusing so much on symptoms, but it's going down to the core issues, and it's really kind of addressing that where the trauma happened at the core and helping release and heal those issues, through these various, techniques and modalities. And then what happens is the symptoms start, decreasing and lessening, and then you're kind of stabilizing, and then you're able to, address and go deeper with the healing process.
And I suppose with trauma too, a lot of people would be in denial for so long as well, because they've pushed it that far down that when it does surfaces, they probably don't want to address it, or they're not addressing it with full honesty. Is that something that you see quite often?
Absolutely. I mean, I went through it myself, and I'm like, oh, and I would go through like, well, and a lot of people maybe don't necessarily know what trauma, like, well, I'm not a veteran of war, or I didn't have this. And so, you minimize it, or, so, like, I'm not that bad, or that kind of thing. But and the thing that I like to tell people is it's so individualized, right? Because, we have professionals like to categorize it, right? So you've got big T's and little T's, right? So you've got your big traumas, which are the obvious, like abuse, or, PT, like a veteran, or domestic abuse, that type of natural disaster. And then you got your little T's, like a criticism, or a tough situation at work, or a big relationship breakup, or, and the thing is like having like accumulated a bunch of little T's could be just as devastating as a big T, And so, and the thing is, like, you are the only one that can decide, if it's a big T or a little T to you. It's so personal. And for anybody to tell you that, well, that wasn't a big deal. I mean, everybody, has their own responses and reactions to trauma, and we just have to deal with it on an individual level. And what I really dove into in my studies when I was working on my master's degree was like, how is it that two people can go through the exact same trauma, and yet one person just rebounds and responds and gets back to life, and then the other person is just absolutely wrecked and devastated, by it. So we really have to like have compassion for ourselves, because not everybody handles trauma the same. We're taught resilience, right, by our caretakers. And if we don't have those skills, we're not as easily able to handle those setbacks as others might be able to.
Oh, 100%. And when you were saying that, I was just recalling a podcast that I'd done. It was two sisters, very similar in age, grew up with the same parents, and they were both abused by the same person. And one went on to strive, and the other one, unfortunately, very sadly, committed suicide as a result of it after years of addiction and things like that. So it is so much individualized. And I think there's, I'd really like to see your view on trauma shaming or comparison as well, because one thing that I see quite frequently in a lot of the conversations that I have is like, yeah, well, anyway, if somebody says, oh, I'm having a really hard time at work. And somebody say, yeah, well, they kind of minimize someone's, big T's and little T's as well. Is this something that you see quite often, talking with people around trauma? Like, it's almost like a trauma shaming type of thing.
Oh my gosh. Yes, absolutely. And I feel like part of it is just people just aren't, they're not comfortable, or they're not trained in how to deal with other people's, difficulties. Right. And so, and I think, for the most part, people are like, they want to like relate, or, like, oh, well, yeah, I had that same thing. And, but and I found that quite a lot in the spiritual community as well. Like, oh, well, just think positively, like, what, you're not healed by now, like,
yeah.
And you just kind of feel like, gosh, like, I've been doing all this stuff, and, there must be something really wrong with me if I'm not better by now, and, but yeah, definitely people minimalizing, other people's, situations. And one thing that I've just found that is so needed, in the trauma community is just like compassionate listening. And we're just not used to that, right? Like when somebody starts crying, immediately we want to hand them tissues, like, stop, like, you're making me uncomfortable. Here's some tissues, like, I need to feel better. I'm not really here to hold space for you, to allow you to process, I need you to just wrap things up. So really, I think more, if we can just help people understand, and if we can actually really find people that provide that compassionate listening, that's just a miracle, just to feel being heard, and holding that space to be able to process emotions is just really key in the trauma healing process.
That's great advice, because like you said, sometimes we're thinking of ourselves. We just, like you said, we just want to hand over the tissues and go, whoa, it's okay, stop crying. We hear ourselves saying this, and it's not until we truly kind of connect with ourselves and our compassionate part of ourselves that we're able to kind of go, hey, it's okay to cry, just let it all out. So what advice would you give if somebody comes to you and says, hey, I'm going through an abuse of some kind or a trauma of some kind? Would you, on the comparison end of things, what advice would you give someone to be able to direct someone if they come to them and say, hey, I'm going through this difficulty, or I've gone through this trauma, or I'm going through this trauma? How would you guide that person to be able to comfort the other person and be able to guide them in the direction they need to go in?
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. So well, first off, I would just be like, I hear you, and, I'm holding space for you. And, obviously we want to make sure that they're in a safe place, so whatever that situation is, if it's abusive, obviously we want to get them out of that situation, because it's hard to heal when you're just re-traumatizing yourself over and over, so making sure that they're removed and in a safe place. And, people, especially, it just depends on how recent it is, right? If they've gone through a natural disaster, their main concern is like basics, right? Making shelter, food, having a roof over their head and clothing and things like that. But once all of that is taken care of, and they're in a safe place, and their basic, survival needs have been taken care of, really, again, it's just providing that sacred, safe space for them to, heal, provide, discuss, process emotions, and talk about their experiences with somebody who can, see them and hear them, for sure.
No, that's fantastic. So this book is just launched?
Yes.
Yeah.
So it just came out on October 23rd. So it's fresh off the press.
Fantastic. And we'll be sharing links where people can actually connect and purchase your book as well, because we want to obviously promote that a lot, especially for overcoming trauma. And can you take us through maybe, not letting out too many details of the book, of course, because we want to be able to buy that and read that for our own healing journey. But how did the 8 steps to healing the past and finding peace within, how did that actually come about? Because you shared with us earlier on in the interview that was the journey and the accumulation of what you actually went through and what you actually found worked. But how did you actually what are the words I'm trying to use, know that is exactly what you needed to share with the world? What was that pivotal moment that you thought, this is it? This is everything, my life's work, me talking to clients, my life's journey of overcoming so many things. This is it, and I need to tell the world. What was the thinking behind that?
Oh my gosh, I love that question. Yeah, because I really had pretty much all of the pieces put together about a little over maybe like a year and a half ago. And, I'm like, gosh, I don't feel like it's complete. I had the majority of it. So, the 8 steps are, the first step is building resilience. And then the second, because and each one kind of builds upon the next one, right? So we get this foundation, and then we get the next one. And so the next one is like raising your vibration, and moving yourself up that, emotional and vibrational ladder, and then the next one is managing your thoughts, right? Because we tend to have all these negative thoughts, especially when, we've been through some difficult times. And then the next one is dealing with your emotions. And so I had all these ones in place, but I was missing like a couple pieces to the puzzle. And so the one was moving into the heart, really. So that one was like a new one that kind of came into play about a year ago. And it's really kind of living from a heart-based type of life, right? Wholeheartedly, and using the heart to guide you and listening to its wisdom. And then the next one is forgiveness, of course, and we kind of get there as we move through the heart, we go into that forgiveness and self-forgiveness. Okay. And it took me a while to get there. I would say my book stalled out for a little while. Well, I really kind of had to go through that myself. I knew it on an intellectual level, but, and I had done so much work on that, but I really kind of had to go through that again, another round, until I really could walk the talk, and then the next one was self-care and self-love. And that was another one that I really did not fully understand until this past year, where I really stepped into that. I got it on an intellectual level, but I really wasn't living it like from the heart. Like I could talk about it, but it was still kind of like a foreign language, like self-love, blah, 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 but I really got it this year. And I was able to write about it really authentically, which was just so exciting for me. I'm like, oh my God, that's what that means, so that was pretty great. And then the final piece of the puzzle was the 8th step kind of plopped into place there at the end, which is keep moving forward, which is so critical, right? Because healing is messy, it really is. There's no straight line from A to Z. It's a swirl and a corkscrew and a zigzag and, 2 steps forward, 5 back, and again, you talked about like that, that shame about it, and it's like, it just is a process, and sometimes it's not graceful or pretty, but, as long as you're just kind of making forward progress, even if they're tiny little baby steps, eventually it's just going to all click into place. So that's kind of how it kind of fell into place for me, was just a couple of those last steps and really walking through them myself to be able to authentically, talk about them.
That's fantastic. I love the process behind books and launching books, because I think, especially with programs or specialized fields like you're in, it's really great to know that the author has talk the talk and walk the walk as well, because it's just such a healing journey, and trauma is just so broad, and so many people have got different interpretations, and it is such a case by case. And I really know that your book will really help people if they're feeling maybe stuck, or what kind of people would want to purchase your book, and how is it going to help them? Is it at the beginning of their journey or at the middle of their journey? What kind of things can people expect to get from your book?
Yeah. So, I think it really applies to all levels of the healing journey, certainly it's definitely, I'm hoping that it catches people in the early stages so they don't have to go through, 30 years of trial and error like I did, and that's really why I wrote it, it was just sort of a guide map, a roadmap of like, okay, here's what I found, is helpful, the first half of the book really talks about like the science and the effect of trauma on the brain, on the body. It talks about shame, toxic shame, which we touched on a little bit, perfectionism, addictions, things like that tend to kind of pop up or crop up, from our trauma experiences that we tend to do, you know, because of our experiences, you know. And then the second half of the book really goes into the steps and just gives, you know, experiential examples that people can use, tools, daily practices, you know, to help release trauma from the body. And it really encompasses ways to release trauma and heal trauma on all levels. So not just mentally or emotionally, but really addresses the physical, the spiritual as well. So it's kind of like a, you know, all-encompassing map, really, guidebook.
That is so fantastic. So you're still counseling and you're still writing and you're still seeing clients. What other things have you got in the works at the moment, or you're just taking a bit of a breather at the moment?
Yeah, so I just did this book launch, and then now December 1st, I am launching my 8-week healing trauma program. So I'm so excited. I'm telling you, this is like my baby, you know, even bigger than the book. And the book was so exciting. Because I'm just really excited to get that out to the world. But yeah, so I am just finishing up, getting ready to launch an 8-week healing program that includes the online course material with the videos and worksheets and all of that instructional material that basically takes the material from the book and puts it in, you know, week by week a program. And then of course people get the one-on-one personal sessions with me, and then the weekly group coaching as well. So yeah, that's coming soon.
Oh, that is so fantastic. I think we're going to be seeing much more great things from you, Allison. You helping the community so much. It is such an important topic that is the key to moving forward, breaking those generational cycles, leaving legacies, and just loving ourselves, right? Just finally encompassing just who we are and what we stand for. And I always say, you know, our stories were given to us for a reason, as unique as they are, and to wear it as a superhero cape and not an anchor. And a lot of people don't get that at first until they start that self-development journey, right? Until they start kind of recognizing, why does this trigger me? And why do I respond to things like that? When we start questioning ourselves and then we start tracing it back to what actually happened in our childhood, or an event or a person or something that's affected us, I don't know whether you agree or not, it's not until then that the true, you know, self-discovery and self-development actually starts. So books like this are really important to, you know, kind of not shortcut us in any way, but to give us the tools that we need, because sometimes we've start to recognize it and we don't know what to do with that. Or what do I do? Do I go to counseling, or do I ignore it more, or do I go to therapy, or do I get a book, or you know what I mean? It's like, I think a lot of people really come to that realization of what triggers them, and they relate it back to an experience, and you know, it's generally, you know, with trauma of some type, and then they don't know where to go from there. So I think the community and the world really needs books like this to be able to help them, and that additional tool and resource to help them on that journey as well. So we really appreciate that. Now, what kind of message would you like to leave our audience on today?
Oh gosh, yes. So, you know, I know that, you know, I mean, like I've been there, I get it, I get you, you know, and I felt hopeless, I felt lost. You know, I just basically had chalked it up to, okay, you know, whack-a-mole, we're just going to manage symptoms for the rest of our, you know, my life. Okay, here we go. But, you know, I really want to encourage, you know, hope and, you know, just the belief that there is an answer, you know, there is hope, and that there, you know, it is possible. And I mean, I'm telling you, like, I am worst case scenario. And I mean, believe me, when you do read my story, and it's hard to be vulnerable, to tell people, like literally here is like my worst, place that I've ever been in my life, but the thing is like, as I journeyed through this, I remember about like a year ago, somebody was like, you look lighter, you look like you've lost weight. And I'm like, no, not really, and then like, I had like, all of this stuff bubbling up in my chest. And I was like, I don't know if I need to go to the doctor, like, what is this? And I realized it was like happiness and joy, and I'd never felt that, like authentic, like not, from coffee, or, I mean, it was just like real joy, and it was bubbling in my heart. And I'm like, wow, like I just had never experienced that before. And I just like want to share that it's possible, and absolutely you just got to move through it, but there is an other side, and I'm there, and it's real, and it's a miracle, quite, but it's just doing the practices, that I outline in the book consistently. And, it's definitely a possibility.
That is so fantastic. Now, I'm going to leave Allison today, and I'm going to highly recommend this book, because this is going to be changing lives and possibly saving lives as well. So if it isn't for people like Allison in the world that is overcoming their trauma and showing strength through their vulnerability and going on to help others and inspire others and give them a helping hand up and not a push down, actually giving them the resources and tools that they need to move forward and be the best version of themselves. And Allison, I loved it when you said you could feel that happiness and joy and you didn't know what it was and you finally felt it. I can just see so many light bulbs going off in our audience after listening to this podcast with saying, hey, I want to feel that. How do I get there? So thank you so much for what you're doing. And I'm looking forward to watching your journey. We may even do a part 2, because I'd love to see what happens after your 8-week workshop program. I think that is absolutely fantastic. And it's giving back to the community and helping others. So I really, really appreciate you today, Allison, for sharing all of your knowledge and daring greatly to share your story and show your strength through your vulnerabilities today as well. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Tracy. It was absolutely a pleasure to be here.
Now, you can find our podcast on YouTube and the Facebook group Victim to Victory podcast series. Allison is changing the world, so we'll drop her links where you can connect with her. If you got value from today, please subscribe, like, and comment. And I'd like to leave you with a message of step into your story, figure out who you are, and do it on purpose. Bye for now.